All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. So today's presentation and sort of the paper that's sort of, I suppose, in its infancy at the moment is just we've brought in this really great innovation using Lego. Just to firstly introduce you, obviously, just to everybody that's involved in this project. It's not just me. There's a team. It's Belinda Breitenbach, who is in the School of Accountancy, much like me, and is what we call Financial Accounting 2. She's the course coordinator. Tasneem, who is Management Accounting 2. Sam Gomez, who is Accounting 2. Myself, who is Auditing 2. And Siri, who is Tax 2. We're known as sort of the second year team, if you will. And we also all have had a part in sort of creating and bringing to life the use of Lego in order to try and better engage our students. The other reason, obviously, why this slide is up here is just to give you all context and awareness as to sort of how things work in the School of Accountancy, how the degree works as well, where we've actually got sort of almost 4 majors, if you will, that our students have to work through at both an undergraduate and then a postgraduate level, and then go on and write sort of these professional board exams that our professional body SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, runs, as well as we've got a new designation with ACCA, which is another chartered accountancy professional body, which is why you'll see there are 5 of us, and there's only 4 disciplines. So we've got accounting, we've got financial accounting. One goes along the route of becoming a SAICA member, the other runs in line with sort of this other chartered accountancy body known as ACCA. But effectively, the content that we need to cover at a second year level is very similar. So sort of the project overlaps in that sense. Okay, so before we delve into the project, which I'll take you through obviously in a moment, what is the problem with accountancy-based modules? What have all of us as course coordinators and myself in particular experienced around trying to teach these different modules? I obviously teach auditing, which is sort of seen as the bad guy in the School of Accounting. Some of you may be aware of its reputation. And of course, I've also taught accounting and financial accounting as well. So sort of I've got a relatively broader spectrum and sort of seen what some of the problems are. The first one there obviously is the theoretical concepts in accounting. How are they derived? And they're derived from generally sort of professional practice. So a lot of what happens is practically, not theoretically, and then they get shoved into these regulations and standards. So what really helps in better understanding accounting and the various disciplines behind accounting is actually seeing it being applied in practice and then saying, oh, I see why that theory now exists. Obviously, how we teach it at a university level is that this is what the theory says, and try and bring in practical examples and try and show our students why it exists and the why behind it, but it's very difficult to sort of conceptualize that. And really that causes the problem, is then students battle to sort of visualize the principles, and it becomes the sort of tick box exercise where you sort of almost start to learn things off by heart just to pass, so you can get into the profession somehow, make lots of money as well as we do. As chartered accountants and so on. So there's this sort of issue around really the learning environment and the teaching environment with accountancy-based modules. And again, like I say, like the slide says at the end, it really does hinder the learning and teaching process. Critical thinking and depth of engagement with content really doesn't occur. And we see that coming through as the students progress into sort of the postgraduate arena, where all of a sudden our students sort of haven't engaged in depth with a lot of what was taught at fundamental levels, as well as in the master's program as well, where our students now need to take sort of issues that they have seen with accountancy and now need to start researching certain topics on it. They grapple to find research questions, and that comes down to probably the way in which they've engaged a lot with the content, and a lot of what happens, and obviously the teaching of it too. We certainly are not perfect, and a lot of the time obviously there's a bit of pressure at times from the professional body as to maintaining certain pass rates and so on. So we probably also are a bit guilty of sometimes sort of spoon feeding a little bit, and teaching towards assessment, which we know is not ideal. So, of course, then the question that always arises is how do we better engage our students? And of course, I just asked for a picture of window dressing, and this is kind of what came up, because a lot of the time that's the buzzword that gets thrown around at different committee level meetings, our own learning and teaching meetings. It's always how do you better engage students? It was the term that came up during COVID. It comes up to this day, you know, how do we better engage students in any environment? And really, you know, I'm a bit sick and tired of obviously this window dressing. We've danced around it for so long now, for so many years, and we're not really addressing the problem at hand. So what happened was I decided to take a look at this and say, well, okay, well, let's start with the problem. Let's really attack this head on. Let's stop window dressing. Let's really address the issue at hand. And then how do we sort of try and rectify this issue? So the first thing is that we want our students to, obviously, we want their improvement to engage on the cognitive, behavioral, and social level. We also want our students, they do a lot of group work. There was a project previously in second year that we ran that involved a lot of group work, but obviously the feedback year on year is that the group work isn't great. One group member carries more than the other. Tasks get divided up. So you'll have 8 students in a group, and student 1 will do task A, student 2 will do task B. And what we were trying to achieve with those projects was to integrate all the disciplines together and get integrated thinking coming through. But obviously, immediately our students compartmentalize each part or task of this project as well. So how can we make group work a little bit more effective? And then, of course, like I said, the integrated thinking. We really, it's a requirement of our professional bodies, both the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants and this international ACCA as well, that accounting professionals that step out into the profession now, the graduates that step out, need to be able to integrate their thinking process. So they need to be able to take principles in accounting, principles in taxation, in management accounting and auditing, and be able to see the links between the 4 disciplines, because ultimately and in actual fact, all 4 disciplines do integrate into one module or one model that is an accountant. And we've got to try and promote that somehow. Also, critical thinking. It's the buzzword that runs around in accountancy all the time, but how do we actually promote critical thinking? And then lastly, of course, the major problem is always bringing accounting to life. So this was where we then decided, well, okay, this is our problem. These are the areas that we want to tackle, that we want to address. How do we get there? All right. And of course, what then came up very interestingly at a conference I attended was the use of Lego. It was at Birmingham City University, where this particular professor had used Lego to better illustrate just concepts in costing. And what I mean by costing is, in a manufacturing environment, each product that gets produced needs to have costs assigned to it so that selling prices can be set, so that certain targets can be met, so that companies can remain profitable and so on. But again, to conceptualize that for students is very difficult unless you've actually physically stood and seen a manufacturing process. It's very difficult to conceptualize these concepts. But what this professor did was they used Lego to sort of go along, and you know, the students had to manufacture something, and as they manufactured it, they had to cost it. And so we decided, wow, that is a brilliant idea, probably, to bring some of these items to life. And that's of course where we then decided we're going to go with this Lego idea, and we're going to build on what sort of was done at Birmingham City University. All right, so in our context at Wits University now, what we did was, firstly, we allocated our students into these groups. So designing the project, we allocated a large class of 800 students into smaller groups that sum up to about 140, with about 6 to 8 students per group. What this does is it's also done randomly. So please understand then everything's randomly, so that we bring in sort of diverse points of view. Students are, it's not, you know, you're not with your friend that you sit in during lecture time, you're with people that you possibly haven't met yet. And so it starts to also require you as a group to sort of function together. A lot of the time, based on the emails that we obviously get, is managing conflict. You've got a lot of different personalities, but it starts to teach you what's going to happen one day in the real world, where you are on an audit and you've got a difficult client or a difficult individual on your team, and you've now got to manage or conflict resolve what's going on. Time constraints as well comes into it, where not everybody necessarily has the same timetable and the same sort of list of demands and so on. So it's really great at bringing through some of those real world type of issues that you're going to deal with. Then what we decided was that we're going to have 6 tasks in this project, and every single task is going to integrate the disciplines of accounting. Okay, and hopefully what that will then do is promote some form of integrated thinking. So each task can't just be broken down into, right, you do the accounting, I'll do the tax, because the task itself integrates all of these concepts and these modules together. Okay. And then, of course, very importantly, is that what we've also done with these tasks is that that the students actually have to go along. You as a student have to go along, and you've actually got to do some research. So not all the content has been taught pertaining to the task at hand. So a bit of research has to be done. It stimulates a little bit of lifelong learning and a bit of critical thinking in terms of, okay, fine, I've now got to read this piece of taxation legislation that I've never been taught. I need to interpret it and apply it to this sort of scenario and this task that's going on. And of course, what's great about Lego, and this is where the social element comes in, is it brings accounting to life. Number one, like I said, in that you can do a build with Lego, and in building it, I'll take you through that now. It's going to bring principles of accounting to life, but also it's lots of fun. At the end of the day, Lego is just it's diverse, it's a lot of fun, it's something different for our students to do. And I'll chat about some of the comments that we got at the end. All right, so that was sort of how we designed the project. Starting the project, what we did was we basically took our students through the life cycle of a business. So what we told the students is that, right, you have got to build a bridge that's going to be made out of Lego. All right, so you've got a contract as an organization and you need to build this bridge. Number one, in order to build that bridge, you have to form a company, which was the very first task. And this integrates multiple streams of disciplines in accountancy, where you've got to register with the CIPC, which is sort of the company's sort of regulator. You've got to register with SARS, which we all love, of course. There's various legislative requirements when you are setting up a company, and all of this need to be detailed as their very first task. Bringing again to life this concept of integrated thinking, and a bit of critical thinking, in that the students needed to go and actually work through the legislations to understand how you actually set a company up. Task 2, we then of course asked them to put together some funding, so a funding proposal, because you're going to have to finance this, okay, as well as a prospectus to potential shareholders. And then of course we moved on to actually physically building the bridge, and this is where the fun part started. So what students had to do was that they were given sort of just some basic specifications. We didn't want students to come in and just put 3 blocks together and say, there's my bridge. It needed to be a certain length and hold a certain weight and so on. But what they needed to do whilst they were planning beforehand the build, they had to sort of cost the project, because you're planning, you're incurring cost as an organization that you're going to need to recover through this project. During the build, they were physically building the bridge now, and as they're physically building this bridge and putting it all together, they're seeing these concepts of costing as well as cost control, which is something that's taught in auditing, where you've now got to manage, you're incurring these costs. How do I allocate them to this bridge? How do I make sure I capture them correctly and accurately? And what we also did to them, which was really fantastic, was on the day, we changed some of the specifications. So the time allocation that was allowed, we changed that and we made it a bit shorter to see how do our students as a team now actually respond to this change. And the whole idea behind this was to address the issue around group work, because obviously when you're building now as a team, it's proper group work. You're sitting together and problem solving on the spot together. It's not one person do this, one person. You can't do that anymore. So this was the real purpose and main intention behind using Lego. And of course, then, like I said, there was a bit of a reflection afterwards to say, well, what did we learn as an organization about how we build bridges, how we cost them and so on, which brought together more disciplines and also allowed for a little bit of reflection in the process. And then finally, of course, completing the Lego project, and this is, of course, where the major accounting sort of element came through. Their final task was to put together a set of financial statements to say, you know what, during our financial year, we built this bridge. This is what our financials look like, to present to the board of directors, as well as they needed to file an annual tax return, bringing all of these principles in accounting, in taxation, in auditing, in costing all to life for them. And then, of course, the last little bit there, which was just we threw in a bit of an ethical dilemma, just to get the students to put forward a presentation about some ethics. But what we'll do in future, we got some really good feedback from faculty while we were actually doing this about how we can integrate this ethical dilemma into our project build. we'll reflect on that and see if it's viable going forward. All right, so that's sort of the project. That's taking you through the project. Hopefully I haven't put you all to sleep. I know accounting is lots of fun. But just to give you some context in terms of where we're going. So we came up with this wonderful idea. Before we did, of course, we just looked at some theoretical frameworks just to make sure that what we were doing was not just sort of this, let's try something different and hope for the best. We grounded sort of the idea in active learning and experiential learning. Active learning, of course, requiring the students to actively go out and obtain knowledge. Experiential, where we're actually bringing accounting to life. I think that was always the really fun thing about this idea behind Lego, was that this build of a bridge, I know it can integrate many other disciplines in engineering, architecture, and so on, but from an accounting perspective, those costs need to be accounted for somehow. This company needs to come to life. And that was the major sort of theoretical framework underpinning the idea behind this sort of research project, this project itself. And then, of course, what have we found? All right, so we've come up with this project. At the moment, of course, this was the very first year that we've implemented it. With the idea that we've got, it's still in its infancy. As I said, we haven't really put together anything major in terms of research. We haven't got ethics clearance, of course, to largely discuss with students and get surveys and feedback, but just sort of the general feedback, the feel in the room. The first question I asked all students after they were done with the build was, did you enjoy it? And there were smiles. And as an auditing lecturer, nobody ever smiles in my lecture or really ever laughs. And everybody was laughing and having fun. We received a lot of emails just sort of thanking us and saying to us, the students would just express that they really enjoyed the process. In addition, we did share this with our professional bodies to say, look, this is what we are trying to do. This is sort of, the project we have in mind, and we got some positive feedback from them as well, saying, it's really a great way in order to develop certain soft skills as well as technical skills that are required by accountants. In addition to that, what was really important, just sort of looking and reflecting inwardly, was that as a team, as I showed you now, there were 5 of us as part of this team, and all 5 of us belong to sort of different departments within the School of Accountancy. And accounting is supposed to be this integrated sort of set of principles and disciplines, and everything should be integrated together, yet we compartmentalize it, even just in the way in which we're structured. And what this did was obviously broke all of those walls down. And of course, by working together, it just also improved team morale and rapport. And of course, I think there's a bit of research, obviously potential for viable research, and I appreciate any feedback on that. And lastly, from a social element, obviously, number one, our students enjoying it, but number two, it's been a really great sort of marketing tool for the school as well. The school would like to use it going forward to sort of market the fact that we have this Lego project. And potentially sort of differentiate ourselves from the rest of the pack to say, at Wits, we've got this Lego project. There have been some really great ideas about the fact that this project as a whole run throughout the year could be moved to sort of a summative assessment rather than as a formative assessment, which again would be a great marketing tool as well. And bringing everything to life is quite innovative and not something that any other sort of school of accountancy in the country has done before. So yeah, from that perspective, it seems to have improved a bit of social engagement, but obviously we're in our infancy and moving forward. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you. And obviously, any questions or feedback I'd really appreciate, and would definitely love to take on board. Hi.
Thanks so much. That was a fabulous presentation. And there's so much to sort of engage with there, but I think something I'd like to tease out a little bit and hear more from you about is, so thinking about the point that you were making about how the way the department is structured, that these subjects are sort of kept separate, but actually in reality they are integrated, combined with the fact that you did group work. And how you did that, and then thinking back to this morning, some comments around the balance, shall we say, between supporting students and independent study and solving things themselves. So the thing I'd like to know is, how did you design and implement or facilitate or not the group work to make it it sounds like it was very successful.
Sure.
So what were some of your strategies there?
So yeah, what we actually did was we only had sort of, I think it was 8 sets of Lego that we managed to sort of get financing for, or funding for, and the students were split into sort of sessions. So we would have 8 groups at a time across these 140 sort of groups, and each Lego build station would have a facilitator that would just sort of oversee and say, are you moving in the right direction? Have you thought about, because what we wanted them to think about was that, for example, they were consuming electricity while they were building the Lego, and so they were just sort of just facilitating that discussion, not guide, just sort of, and actually that was where a really fantastic idea about ethics came up, where we possibly in future will get the facilitator to maybe bribe the group. Just to bring in that ethical dilemma, because afterwards when they reflect, they need to talk about operational matters, ethical matters, and so on. But that's effectively how we sort of brought that through. That was how it was sort of implemented, was in this group, these small little groups, and then you had this facilitator overseeing it and just sort of briefly, gently sort of just guiding them in the right direction. I'm not sure if that answers your question completely, though. Yeah, and I mean,
could I
yes,
ask that in the lead up to the build, so that first task, the one that was exceptionally thrilling, where maybe students were working a bit more independently, but still as a group, how was that managed or facilitated?
So in that case, yeah, that was sort of something then that we probably didn't manage all that well and probably could do a little better, where what we ideally really wanted them to do was put all of that documentation together and then come to us with it, but it became more of just a submission sort of requirement because of time and resource constraints. But going forward, it's something we would really like them to sort of submit. We review it. They're then given the date of their Lego build and so on. It's sort of that staggered approach, but it is largely group work. So the independent sort of work doesn't, they sort of don't work independently at that point just yet. But and there, obviously, from a group perspective, the big thing about each task was that it wasn't split into a discipline specific. So yes, you have to register with SARS, but the registration of a company embodies all sort of disciplines together. So just to try and avoid them in that case, sort of compartmentalizing everything. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thanks, Nora. Thank you.
Gary, thank you for the awesome presentation and just showing us how you can also implement that element of play whilst also still ensuring that the teaching takes place. My question would be, are there any maybe key things that stood out for you that you did not anticipate from the entire project that you've done?
Yeah, I think as I said a bit earlier, we sort of had these wonderful ideas of how we thought the project would go in terms of especially sort of that very first task where you sort of needed to bring everything together and put together all these returns and submit them. And that sort of just turned into just very quickly just put a document together and submit it on Owazi to us. Your group leader can submit it, which was a bit disappointing. I think also we experienced a few sort of other delays in terms of sort of getting Lego on board and having a few more sort of sets to build, because it did feel like the build itself was a little bit rushed when the students were sort of building 20 minutes in and out, the next group, which we thought wasn't really going to be a problem. So those were some of the sort of unfortunate sort of, I suppose, delays that we've had. And of course, lastly, I mean, we did get some positive feedback, but whether all students necessarily agreed that it was enjoyable, I think that remains to sort of be seen. We still need to sort of gather the data and so on, and whether they actually learned something. I do hope that somehow it stimulated a bit of cognitive sort of engagement as well, but we're not too sure whether that happened. We're a bit worried still that a lot of things were still compartmentalized a bit in the way that we set things up.
And there's another comment saying, thank you, Gary. This is a very innovative way of engaging students and considering the current problem of the student participation and engagement. Fiona has a question.
Okay, it's not so much a question as I actually went and attended one of these sessions, one of the Lego sessions, and it was amazing to see how engaged the students were, to feel the vibe around the lecture hall rather than have just people just sitting back passively listening to the lecturer. You could tell, I mean, as Gary says, you don't know until you've actually seen the fruits of this, I know what the results will be. But for me, it was really inspiring to see students actually doing something active and doing something that was integrated, not just focusing on a specific subject. But I'm looking forward to seeing the results, Gary, because I was really inspired when I came into that particular session.
No, thanks, Fiona. Thanks for that. Yeah, and I think you also raised the point, and I think that was where we could see that the group work element had gotten so much better, where the students had to all participate. It wasn't
Yes.
you had to physically all sit and build this bridge and problem solve, the time constraint and so on. And then I know you guys came up with that ethical sort of dilemma, which I think is fantastic to add another spanner in the works next year. But yeah, thank you for that. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.
Yes, Norali, you have your hand up.
Sorry, second question. I'm interested in the way that you said, you spoke to the professional bodies and there was very positive feedback from them. Is it too early, or is this too much of a once-off at this stage to say that perhaps that constraint is less of a constraint, and that there might be more openness from professional bodies or other external bodies that we might as teachers see as a limitation on what we can do, and that this is perhaps an indication of a more fruitful way forward?
It might be a bit early to say, but I know the one major positive element was that particularly SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, they've got a new sort of teaching or learning and teaching framework that they want to implement, and they've introduced these sort of, they call them acumens, but it's just sort of skills that students need to develop, and this talks a lot to a lot of those skills. It was one of the reasons why we could get the kind of funding to get this project off the ground in the first place. Was we sort of went to one of the corporates and said, look, this is what it's trying to develop. These are some of the acumens, these future acumens that are coming through. So certainly I think it's a way to open up that discussion and allow us a little bit more leeway. I do think it's sort of one idea on how to implement some of these sort of acumens, as they call it, to drive the process. So I haven't thought of that quite yet, but yeah, it would be nice if we get a bit more involvement from their perspective. Thanks.
And then there's a question from Letlahonolo.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gary, for your presentation. It was very, very insightful. From my perspective, I'm not 100% clued up with matters of auditing and the like, but I'd like to find out from you, is there something, now that you've adopted this model, do you think that you could build on it in any way, in a way that would be specific to South Africa? Is there something like that? Have you considered building on, the model that you've adopted? Can it be done?
Yeah, it certainly can. I do think so. I think there's a lot of room for other disciplines to also use this, and by disciplines I mean outside of our faculty even, that really can use Lego in this context, because what it does is just visually brings everything to life. I do know the wonderful thing about Lego as well is that they do offer sort of different programs where you can actually, like I said, we just had the one sort of change on the day. You can develop a variety of different skills that you find might be lacking with your student body using Lego as well. So I think in a South African context, I think definitely it's something that we should definitely look at and can definitely use going forward. Yeah, I think it's just very different in sort of the way that we do things, and something South African specific, hopefully. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think there is certainly ability. It takes a bit of just sort of thinking how you can integrate it into your course. I mean, it's a bit extreme that Lego and accountancy would ever have any sort of relationship.
Yeah.
But from an educational perspective, we started to see how it could bring things to life. And I think in other disciplines, it could achieve the same sort of result. I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't know, but it certainly could. Yeah, whether it's, yeah, I don't know. I think at the moment, for us, what was just great was sort of changing the engagement with our students. But so much has come out of it, and there's so much to sort of take in.
Yeah.
Whether it could be something that we specifically do, I think as well, would be wonderful. I think one of the last intentions behind the social engagement element was that, with WITS, and what we saw was similar at Birmingham City University where they did it, was that the sort of the experience at university was very similar. Birmingham's also quite a commercial sort of city, so is Johannesburg, and the students don't also really kind of enjoy being on campus and campus life and so on. It's not as fruitful as it would be at other universities, and the Lego element sort of came in to try and balance that a bit. So that was one of the other intentions. But I mean, it would be lovely if it's something that would sort of differentiate us a little bit. It would be great, and hopefully long term it could do something different. I know the last thing with Lego is that they do a lot of great work, sort of at more your primary and secondary school level, to upskill and develop learners. Whether at a university level they're still willing to do that, that's what we're sort of also trying to get them on board and trying to show them what can be done, to see if we can't take it a bit further. So hopefully that's kind of the direction we might be able to head in.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.